The International Finance Corporation has been expanding its investments across Africa, and Rwanda is increasingly part of that story. And joining me today is Ethiopis Tafara, the Regional Vice President for Africa, who's in the country really to sort of explore new development opportunities, but also strengthen the IFC's investment portfolio here in the country. Perhaps we can start on a lighter note. I think in 2 months from now, you'll be celebrating your first anniversary in the role. Quick question, do you still want to do it with all the chaos that's going on?
Not only do I still want to do it, I am all the more energized by the job, having spent a year doing it. The energy and the potential on the continent are absolutely remarkable, and if anything, it gives you a sense of very strong purpose, and it's a dream job in many respects.
Yeah, surprised to hear that, but also encouraged to hear that, especially with all the chaos that is happening right now across the world. But perhaps you can focus on Rwanda. So you met a lot of officials, different officials, including the Prime Minister. What are some of your key takeaways from the interactions you've had?
So the principal reason for my trip here is the discussion of the country partnership framework with the Rwandan government. So as you probably know, what we do at the World Bank Group is we every so often sit down with the government to put in place a plan for how we will work with the government in support of its priorities. So the old CPF has run its course. We're now discussing the new country partnership framework. And it's a slightly different model we're applying these days, in that it used to be the 3 or 4 institutions that comprise the World Bank Group would engage the government separately. We've decided we want to engage the government together, so that we can understand what the government wants to finance in terms of its priorities with public money, which of its priorities it wants to finance with private money, and that gives us a sense, IFC being a private sector solutions provider and the bank being a public sector solutions provider, and MIGA addressing political risk, how we can serve the interests of the government, how we can work together, and how we can mutually support one another with the objective of helping the government with its priorities.
Yeah, and obviously part of what you're trying to achieve is to help the government achieve the Vision 2050,
yes,
which is a very ambitious blueprint, for which the government wants to truly advance its economy and employ, make sure that more people have access to jobs. How do you plan to help or support the government to be able to achieve this kind of vision, but also the short-term and medium-term goals, including the NST too?
Very good. So it turns out that the priorities of the government and our strategy for the next 5 years are perfectly aligned, right? So we, as an organization, have, and this is the World Bank Group, have decided that we need to make job creation our North Star. The reason for that is demographics. And if you look at the demographics here in Africa, and what I'm about to say with respect to Africa applies equally to Rwanda, 70% of the population is under the age of 30. 50% of the population is under the age of 15. This is a demographic dividend if they're all employed, but it will be a huge challenge if we're not creating jobs for all this youth that's coming to the market. So having made job creation our North Star, we then are focusing on what are the enablers of job creation and what are the sectors that create jobs, the ones that create the most jobs. The enablers are energy. Without power, without energy, there's no development that's possible. So we continue to look to finance energy projects. And we have a World Bank Group initiative that you may be aware of called M300, where we're looking to electrify 300 million Africans out of the 600 million that don't have energy and don't have power by 2030. But the other big enabler is transportation and logistics and digital. Because if you're creating jobs, You also need to then connect people and businesses to markets and markets to markets, and that is physical infrastructure, roads, trains, ports, but it's also digital infrastructure. In today's world, the market connection happens in the virtual world as much as it happens in the physical world. So we're looking for opportunities to finance these sorts of projects. And then you've got the job creators themselves, agriculture being one of the biggest job creators, and very important to the Rwandan economy and the African economies. Tourism. It turns out tourism, every dollar invested in tourism creates more jobs than in any other sector. And Rwanda has a good head start and a comparative advantage by virtue of all the work they've done in the tourism space. SMEs and SME finance. 80 to 90% of jobs in any economy are created by small and medium-sized enterprises, yet they struggle to get financing. So we're now thinking about how do we increase financing to SMEs. Value add and local manufacturing is another area. And it just so happens these areas that are priorities for us are priorities for the government as well.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, like what is your approach towards job creation? Because one of the biggest challenges that we have is that we need to create more jobs, but at the same time we need to create more productive and decent jobs for the people. So when you look at the government's plan is to create at least 250,000 jobs every year. And the question is, what is it different that the government can do to be able to not just create jobs, many jobs for people, but productive and decent jobs?
Well, what the government can do is what good governments always do, which is to create an enabling environment for these sectors to actually thrive and create the jobs that are necessary. So, you take agriculture, for example, as an example. As I said, very important to economies on the continent, and including Rwanda. For agriculture to be successful, there are a number of things that you need to do, right? We're working with technology companies, ag techs as we call them, to use technology as a means of increasing productivity of farmers and increasing their viability as businesses. So ag techs, we work with these ag techs, they geospatially map smallholder farmers, large groups of them. They figure out what does this group of farmers need in terms of inputs, seeds, fertilizer, mechanization for harvesting. They provide those services. Then, they collect data as they work with these smallholder farmers. They make this data available to the financial institutions. The financial institutions, on the strength of this better data, are willing then to lend to this group of farmers. We incentivize that lending by virtue of providing guarantees to the banks. In all of that work, there's an important role for the government to play with respect to cooperatives, the organization of cooperatives. What do they have available to them that the ag techs can use in terms of fertilizer and seed to get to the farmers? So part of our job is really to sit down with government and understand what we can do as a private sector financier working with private sector clients, but what help we need from the government to make all of this possible. And a lot of it is creating the environment in which these sectors can thrive, right? The same will be true in tourism. Tourism is an ecosystem, right? You need hospitality, right? You need hotels, but it's more than hotels. It's airports, it's transportation, it's services in support of those hotels, it's power, it's water, it's digital. Some of those things the private sector can address on its own, but a number of those things are going to require government help and government input. Transportation, roads, for example, airports. Usually there are PPP arrangements if they're not entirely privately financed, which is generally not the case. There's a role for the government to play in terms of the infrastructure. So what it can do is to think about the sectors that are going to create the greatest number of jobs, but then figure out what role do I play in making it possible for those sectors to thrive.
Yeah, I think that takes me to my other question, which is, you're already doing something about it, which is, I think last year you signed a partnership with the government, the Minister of Agriculture, to help them achieve climate smart agriculture. And I think you were able to identify about $335 million worth of investment opportunities. What is it that has been done between then and now, and what is it that you're doing to ensure that these potential investment opportunities come to reality?
So, again, business development is a difficult business, right? We have to find clients that want our financing, that want our support. Sometimes they're readily available in the marketplace. Sometimes we've got to identify clients that we know of somewhere else and say, we think there's an interesting opportunity for you in Rwanda, and bring them to this marketplace and support them as they think about, is this a place in which my business will do well? And it's lumpy. You go through periods where you see a lot coming in and a lot that you're financing, and then you have down periods. But what we do is consistently think about, what are the development gaps in a country, right? How much of that development gap can we target, and what clients can we bring to help close that gap, right? And we think about it in sectoral terms. I've talked to you about agriculture, I've talked to you about tourism. We're thinking about it in terms of manufacturing, right? What are the manufacturing opportunities in this country? Do we know of people who would be interested in value-add manufacturing in Rwanda? What's going to be required of the government to make that possible? We've been talking about, for example, industrial zones, right? And we have clients who are interested potentially in running industrial zones or being present in industrial zones, but those don't work unless you've got power and water coming to the zone. Again, that's the kind of conversation we're having with the government. So what we're doing is consistently and continuously looking for businesses in the sectors that create jobs, incentivizing them to come by telling them we'll accompany you, we'll de-risk, we'll finance you, and then working with the government to make it possible for those businesses to succeed.
So you say some come, some don't. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
What have you found out? Especially on that front, you wanted to build a pipeline of investment.
Yeah.
Over the next couple of months. What is the investment sentiment out there when you talk to investors?
Well, first of all, I wish it just took a couple months. Building a pipeline usually is about a year to year, 2-year process. So the investments we make today are usually the result and the fruit of work that's happened over at least a year worth of work. And the sentiment out there with respect to Rwanda is quite positive, right? I mean, I think, what do businesses look for? They look for regulatory certainty, stability, consistency in terms of government actions, and the success of the tourism industry in Rwanda has a lot to do with those kinds of qualities that the government has demonstrated. There is certainty around regulation, there's certainty around legal frameworks, there is stability in the country. So I think for many, Rwanda is an interesting destination. I think the challenge that Rwanda faces is generally scale, right? So a lot of the investors we work with are looking for major investments to be made, and it's a small country. Yet, nevertheless, there are those who see there's appeal, even in a small country, to try and tackle whether it is in the manufacturing sector, whether it's in the tourism sector, whether it's in the agriculture sector. So we don't see a shortage of interest. It's just a question of building that pipeline over time. And really making sure that they understand what we are interested in, which is to tackle these areas that are going to result in the most job creation.
Right. So let's talk about something else, which Rwanda is very interested in, and it's trying to build the capacity, which is vaccine manufacturing.
Yeah.
And the IFC, I think in 2021, signed a partnership with the government to support the efforts towards, building capacity for vaccine manufacturing. Where are we now?
Oh, we are, I can talk about a continental initiative that has very important implications for Rwanda. So when I came on board almost a year ago, one of the first things that the team and I did was to sit down and think about the pharmaceutical sector in Africa. And I was very surprised to find that it turns out, depending on whether or not you're talking about medical supplies, medication or vaccines, 85 to 99% of what's consumed on the continent is imported, okay? And from the standpoint of medical sovereignty, that's a bit of a challenge. And I think many remembered what happened during the COVID years where, regrettably, many African countries found themselves at the very back of the line, despite the fact that there were great needs here in terms of vaccines and the like. So what we decided was we should undertake an effort to double production on the continent by 2030. and to help the African Union with its target of getting to 60% of what's consumed on the continent being produced on the continent. Now, doubling production is not a matter of doubling production in every country. There are certain countries that have a comparative advantage because they already have pharmaceutical industries that can quite easily increase the capacity of their production. And I think Rwanda will find itself in that category. So we are now sitting down, thinking about where are the opportunities for us to invest and finance to increase this production. South Africa, Rwanda, Kenya, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria are the countries that immediately come to mind, and there are a couple of others. And working with our colleagues at the bank to make sure that the environment will allow for the doubling of production, because if you double production here, and there's a doubling of production in South Africa, let's say, you're looking for a market. It means these other markets where they don't have production have to be willing to buy and allow the sale of these products. But that means the phytosanitary standards have to be relatively common. There has to be mutual recognition of these standards. But we're hoping that by 2030 we'll be far along in this exercise of doubling production. And part of that will be financing pharmaceutical companies around the continent, including here in Rwanda.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to vaccine manufacturing or even pharmaceutical products, development of other pharmaceutical products, is the technology transfer. You know, when you look at most of the debates at the WTO over the years, and there's a reason why I asked that specific question, where are we now, a few years down the road, is because people are asking, BioNTech is supposed to be here and producing the drug so far, but it's not as easy as it sounds, you know. Is it feasible that we could hit these targets, especially what you mentioned, the 60% supply being produced domestically by 2040, if we're still struggling with complex issues such as the technology transfer?
So, as I said, you realize there is capacity already on the continent. And we're not talking about innovations with respect to diseases or viruses we have yet to encounter in developing vaccines for those. We're talking about basic pharmaceuticals, right, and basic vaccines. And you have companies on the continent that have that capacity now, right? It's just a question of who's going to offtake if they double that production. So there is existing technology, and some of the API will need to be imported, this is true, but there is existing technology and knowledge already present that we can take advantage of to double that production, and that's what we're talking about. We're also hoping, and by the way, this is not an exercise whereby we're not welcoming pharmaceutical companies from Europe, from the United States, from Asia, to come and set up shop here as well. That is also welcome. But overall, just wanting to be sure that we can get to some production on the continent, taking advantage of what exists in terms of capacity, but also inviting additional capacity if people are so inclined.
Let's talk about the Africa CEO Forum. I think it's coming up in May this year. Kigali is going to host the conference. Very excited. I think we hosted this in 2024. During that time, I think IFC signed a lot of partnership agreements with different countries, including Rwanda, Kenya, Mali, and other countries. A lot of commitments were made then. How have some of these commitments materialized?
Commitments in terms of investments, you mean?
Yeah, in terms of investment.
So, listen, we are doing far more financing than we ever have, right? So we financed about 15 billion. We committed 15 billion last year, which was a record year for Africa. We are shooting to commit about 20 billion this year. And that's not possible unless you're following up on the commitments you're making, right? So we are, I can't speak to the specific commitments that were made over the course of the past 3 or 4 years because they precede my time. But certainly what I'm seeing is that we are increasingly in demand, doing more and more, and seemingly satisfying the commitments we're making vis-a-vis clients, both old and new, in terms of supporting what they're trying to do with both debt financing as well as equity financing. That's the other thing that is shifting at IFC, is that we're looking to do more in terms of equity financing, right? So we have a history of doing this for 50 or 60 years. For the past 10 years or so, we've done less equity financing, but we want to come back to doing more. The reason for that is it's probably the most important form of financing you can actually deliver in any economy, because it is the riskiest, but it's probably what's needed most, right? So if I think about Africa, with debt you run companies, but with equity you build companies. And what we need to do is build companies that serve to close development gaps, that are focused on development issues that we think are important for us to tackle, and being willing to take a risk for that company to help it grow, turn it from a local champion into a national champion, into a continental champion, and why not a global champion.
What is happening right now scares so much, especially with the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing across the world, in light of the investment commitments that you've made and you keep making?
So in other words, are we worried that people won't be able to pay us back because of the geopolitical context? Listen, that's something we always have to factor into the decisions we take in terms of financing. And it's part of the risk that we take. It's a calculated risk. But that's consistent with the mandate, right? In many respects, we have to be there when others won't. We find that most of our clients, because of who we are, will do their utmost and do their best to actually pay us back, even under the most difficult of circumstances. And in addition to that, we think that in difficult times is when we need to be counter-cyclical. That's when we expect commercial banks and other financiers are going to pull back, but the need remains, and so we need to be there to provide that financing. And we have to take that risk intelligently and smartly, but we can't run away. I think that would be inconsistent with the mandate.
Lastly, what do you hope to achieve from this year's Africa CEO Forum?
This year's Africa CEO Forum, each year keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the conversations are really very important. It's become the premier gathering of CEOs in Africa to talk about issues of the day. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk about what we believe are the most important areas of investment for the continent. Holding in Kigali also helps make sure that people see the CEO Forum as an Africa-wide forum. Its history, it started off, most of the meetings were taking place in Abidjan, was viewed as a very francophone gathering. Being able to host it around the continent in Kigali and elsewhere actually makes it more of a continental forum, open and available to all. So that's part of the appeal of doing it here. But we're hoping that we'll just deepen the conversations we've had around what the continent needs in terms of financing, the role that the private sector needs to play in developments, the kind of support that institutions like ours can bring to bear, but also tackle some of the new issues that are emerging. Nuclear, I keep hearing maybe we should have a conversation around nuclear power, right?
Yeah.
So this will be an opportunity to talk about that. The creative industries and sports and entertainment as an engine, as an economic engine, much undervalued in the continent. I just came from the sports city here. Phenomenal in terms of what it makes possible for events, but also think about all the job creation associated with that. All of not just the venue, it's all the businesses that support the venue, it's the technicians that work the lights and the sound. And so, again, an opportunity to talk about sports and entertainment as an engine of growth, in addition to talking about issues of the day around nuclear and power.
Tafara, pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.